Hello guys, today we are painting a pig that is very close to my heart. I'll tell you more about him later, but I just wanted to intro the video by showing you our inspiration for today. I'm diving right in using my aqua pastels from Jane Davenport. As you can see, I always start with my sketch already done. I find that something that I like to do off camera where I can just focus on getting the right outlines, the right positioning, without having to make it centered for the camera. And I'm using red, kind of a fuchsia-y purple, and this other color that's kind of like a wine-y red. I only used that kind of sparingly, but I wanted to see how it would look on my finished piece. And then you can see I have a daffodil in the corner where I just added some green and yellow. I really like using these watercolor pastels because they allow me to add different variations of color throughout the illustration without having to dip back and forth through the different colors in my palette. I'll still kind of do that depending on the amount of space I'm trying to fill. But I've found that when I'm especially filling a large area of space, like with this pig's body, that I like having that color already laid down. Plus, it's just kind of fun to plan where I'm going to put my colors and all of that. And then I just dove in again with actual watercolors this time. So you can see how those watercolor pastels blend out. They sometimes leave a mark depending on how much you use, how hard you're pressing on the paper when you use them. But I kind of like the texture, if I'm being honest. I think it gives it a handmade look, kind of a fun, playful, illustrative look too. You know, with my artwork, I'm never trying to make it perfect. Especially with watercolors, I don't feel the need for it to be super smooth or anything. Of course, I want it to look intentional, but I don't feel like it has to be, like it looks like it's printed or not watercolor. At the end of the day, I'm using watercolors, so I want it to look like that. I was thinking today about making this more of a tutorial, but I decided against it because I feel like the process I go through with my watercolors is pretty straightforward. I start with a sketch. I always sketch in red because, especially with watercolors, but I also found this with alcohol markers, you just can't detect the colored pencil lines as much as you could graphite. These pencil lines don't smear also like graphite would smear. But I just like how light it is, and for me, it erases perfectly fine. I try not to press too hard when I'm doing a sketch for a painting, but even if I do press a little hard, I can get it light enough. By the time I watercolor it and put liner work over it, then you can't even tell. So I always start with my sketch, and then only as of recently have I been going in with those aqua pastels that you saw. But that's when I'll use those at the beginning when the paper's dry rather than going in while the paper's wet. I just don't care for that look with my style all that much, to be honest. And then I go in with flat washes of color. So that's kind of where I am right now in the process. As I'm doing that, like I said, I will dip in, add a little bit of color here. If I'm using pink, I might add some magenta or one of my cooler reds or warmer red, depending on which one I started with. I really love the red that I'm using, side note, for the feet and the ears. This came from my Jane Davenport palette. I think it's the Warm Tones Petite palette. Oh, this is such a punchy, vibrant, juicy red. And that's actually part of why I wanted to paint this whole pig, was because I wanted to use pinks and red because I just fell in love with this red color so much. But anyhow, after I do my flat washes of color, I'll go in and add some little details here and there. It depends. On this one, you can see that I'm going to go in and do the shadows here in just a little bit, where I use kind of a gray toned purple and just water it down. Every video I talk about how I really don't have my shadows figured out yet, but I'm working on it. I'm still working on it, and I'm actually not mad about it this time. I think I'm getting better, which is really good news. But I did the shadows first this time. Normally I'll do the details, but I wanted to do this kind of retro star spark pattern on the pig's body. And I just didn't want those lines to smudge. I wanted them to be bold. And so I thought, no, I'll do the shadows first, and I can always do the pattern over top. And with some of the details, I will also wait until the shadows are done, just because the shadows, as you can see, take up bigger areas of color. Speaking of me getting better at doing shadows with watercolor, you can see that I really messed up. I had too much paint loaded on my brush, or too much water in it, and I kind of got outside of the lines and ended up bringing the shadow that was for the back leg in the front to the most forward leg, and then it just bled, and I was being impatient, and so I just kept going in, trying to fix it, and I thought, no, I just gotta let it dry. I can lift it later. These aren't very dark colors. And I was able to fix it, thankfully. I didn't panic. I was impressed with myself, because usually I panic. And that's one of the things with traditional artwork that gets me, is that I'm always so scared to mess up. Yep, you can see there's that impatience trying to go in while it's still wet. It was like a minute's worth of dry time, and I thought, nope, for sure I can go in. Surely it won't just worsen the problem. Yeah, it worsened the problem. But we get there eventually, I promise. So once I've done my patterns and my details, I like to do lots of line work afterwards to like accentuate the hair and bring some fullness to it, or to outline the whole piece. I always like that kind of coloring book, cartoonish look to my illustrations, and so I always go in and do some line art. For backgrounds, you can see that I did add a background to this piece later on, and I usually, as of lately, haven't been doing backgrounds. At most, I'll do a light wash of color, but this time I went a little heavier. I decided to challenge myself. I went dark, and while I'm really pleased with the outcome, backgrounds I find kind of tricky, because I never know when the right time to do them is. And I definitely don't plan ahead enough to know if I should do it before or after. You know, I've heard that you're supposed to work light to dark. And in this case, I got lucky, and that's what I did. But if I wanted to do a light yellow background, well, I still wouldn't have done that to start out with, probably. I probably just would have had to been careful when I got to actually doing the backgrounds. But I think with art, it's more important to do what works for you in your brain and how you just like to work, rather than doing it the way you're supposed to do it, because the way you're supposed to do it is kind of arbitrary and nonsense. But that's pretty much my process I go through every time. I kind of follow the same formula, and I don't know, I think that even though these videos are sped up, you get a good sense of how I like to work, and if you really liked this piece, that you could figure out from what I'm showing you on screen how you could make it your own and how to do it in a similar way to how I've done it. I do suggest, if you do it yourself, that you put your own spin on it, you make your own little twist. I'd also love it if you shared it with me. I think that'd be super awesome to see. But overall, I'm really pleased with how this pig turns out in the end. I thought this was such a fun project. A lot of the paintings I've done lately have been of my girl characters, so it was really fun to switch it up. I showed you that pig at the beginning of the video. That pig is named Sleeping Pig, or sometimes also known as Silky, but pretty much named Sleeping Pig. And this is a stuffed animal I've had for, probably since I was 6 or 7 years old, and I used to sleep with it every single night. I always felt like I could have a good night of sleep if I had my Sleeping Pig with me. But then one time, Sleeping Pig went missing, and it was like a whole thing. Oh my gosh, I was so A, confused, and B, worried. And Sleeping Pig was lost for at least a year, and I searched everywhere, and I could only imagine that I had somehow gotten rid of Sleeping Pig, that had somehow gone to Goodwill with a few other toys, and that she was to be seen no more. Oh my gosh, it wrecked me. And so my mom took me to Party City, where we had gotten Sleeping Pig, and we were looking and seeing if we could find a new one. And they didn't have any pigs, but they had this kind of weird pink duck named Gemma, and so we got the pink duck named Gemma. But I'm not sure if she's a duck or a platypus, to be honest, but she wasn't the same. Now, I still have Gemma, okay? But she wasn't Sleeping Pig. She was cute, she was great, but she wasn't Sleeping Pig. And so then I believe it was a couple months later, we go back to Party City. Because I don't know if you remember Party City way back in like the early mid 2000s. They had lots of toys, and it's like where you would get Groovy Girls and really good Webkins. Anyhow, and they had a sleeping pig, like the same style. Now, this sleeping pig looked just slightly different, like its face was more round, but I was set. I was like, okay, you know what? I can convince myself that this is the same pig stuffed animal, and there's peace in the world again. Well, just like it always seems to happen, after I get this new sleeping pig, a month later, guess who shows up? Old sleeping pig. Yeah, so I used to sleep on this couch in my mom's room when I was scared at night. She had I had a bed, but in her room, I would sleep on this little couch. And I guess one night I had slept there, and Sleeping Pig had drifted in between the cushions and had been underneath this couch cushion for a whole year. And so I lifted up the cushion, and she was like flat. She was so squished that I was kind of creeped out. And I remember I ran downstairs and I got tongs because I was excited, but I was also freaked out. And I got some tongs like that you would use to barbecue. And I picked her out of the couch and her little flat squished head. And honestly, I don't think she's ever had the same shape since then. And that had to have been at least 15 plus years ago. But now I have two sleeping pigs. They're reunited. I call them the twins because I have a thing with my stuffed animals where I just love them. Even though I am 25, I have a very special place in my heart for my stuffed animals. They just bring me so much comfort, and they give me that childhood nostalgia, that comfort that you get when you have your toys as a kid. I still hold on to that. And I like that. I think that that's part of what makes me who I am, and it's just a funny little quirk about me. Speaking of that childhood nostalgia, I get so many people who are around my age, maybe a little older, maybe a little younger, telling me what my art reminds them of. And they always say that it reminds them of their childhood, that it feels very nostalgic. I posted this picture of this pig on my Instagram story recently, and somebody had messaged me back saying that this reminded them of Maggie and the Ferocious Beast, and I think they were totally right. If you've ever seen that show, this pig looks like a hybrid of Beast and Hamilton, and I thought that was so funny that they had seen it because they were 100% right. But with my art, I've gotten people saying that it looks like Maggie and the Ferocious Beast before. I get JoJo's Circus a lot too. That was another show I really liked. It had like a claymation look, which is something I really have liked as a kid, or I really liked it as a kid. I really like it now. Sometimes people say that it just looks like PBS Kids from the 2000s, which I think is kind of funny and kind of true. Like it's not something specific. It's just PBS Kids from 2004, and I can work with that. The other one that I see, and this one is slightly intentional, is Roly Poly Oly. That was another show that was on, I think, Disney Junior. And the artist of those books, and then it became a show, was William Joyce. And I love William Joyce's artwork. He also did Meet the Robinsons. He did some work for the Robots movie. It was a book, and then it was not a book or something. It was weird, but he did the kind of like creative illustrative work for that. He also did that Guardians, that one that's got Jack Frost and Santa, and it's really cool. So I love his work, and so I definitely take a lot of inspiration from him. I don't try and copy his style. I think my style already lends itself to that kind of quirky, almost retro future inspired look, but I really, really love his artwork. But I'm interested to see what you think. Do you see any of these shows that you might remember from your childhood, or does my artwork remind you of anything, especially those nostalgic things? I got another comment. I believe it was either on a YouTube video or on one of my shorts, and somebody had said something along the lines of, "Your artwork looks like a TV show that is fondly remembered by kids from the 90s and 2000s who are now in college or something like that. And that comment cracked me up because I think they're totally right. I think that my style definitely has that early 2000s kid show look. And I really hope that that style hasn't gone so out of date and that there's still a place for it. My hope, my real hope here is that those kids that watched, the people that watched those shows as kids, that they are now having kids, and so they'll want to buy my illustrations and hopefully one day my picture books because it gives them that same feeling they had as a kid. So we'll see. We'll see if that actually ends up happening. There's two things about this painting that I kind of wanted to draw our attention to talk about a little bit more. One is the background. I went in with this really dark, beautiful blue, actually. It feels very gemstone-y, which I really like. This came from that Jane Davenport palette. Like I said, I kind of rediscovered some of these paints, and I really like having them in my collection. While I don't use them in my everyday palette, it was perfect for this piece where I was able to pull them out and add them because really I had no clue what color that, to use. What would make the pig pop, where the dandelion, or not the dandelion, the daffodil, come on now, where the daffodil would pop, and give it some punch. And I really ended up liking this color. As you can see though, because it was a large wash of color and it's a really dark color, I had to do it in patches. There are some areas that I'm trying to fix because I thought they were a little too scruffy, but I actually don't mind the texture that comes from this. I was really worried that it was going to look a little bit amateur, if I'm being honest. That it would look a little, like just not refined enough, and that I wasn't, it showed that I don't have, a master's degree in watercolor, basically. But I don't mind the texture. Like I said before, when using watercolor paints, I don't mind when it looks like I used watercolor paints. I don't need it to look like a very flat, smooth wash. I'm also using cold pressed paper, so it's not like that's even what I'm really trying to go for anyhow. But you'd have to let me know what you think. If you think that it definitely has room for improvement, or if you also like that kind of watercolory, washy, I don't want to call it splotchy because that has a negative connotation. But splotchy positive, can we say that? Splotchy positive background. Now I'm just going in, doing the line art. I love this stage. I'm holding my breath the whole time. My shoulders are cramping because I'm so tense. I'm not breathing. If you could hear the audio, it's me like holding my breath and then doing this big exhale when I get past the scary part. But what I love is that this is where the character in the painting comes to life. Like that, like when we add the eye, don't you just feel like there's so much more life to this pig? Oh my goodness, I just love it. The other thing I wanted to draw our attention to in this painting is that daffodil that's down in the bottom corner. Originally, that was not going to be in the painting, and the only reason I had added it is because I had drawn this pig way off center. I was trying to be so careful, so I don't know what happened. My brain just collapsed for a moment, and when I held it far away from my face, I was like, oh boy, we either need to do a couple things. We need to redraw, which I did not want to do because I didn't think it would look very good, and I was really happy with the sketch. We could trim the paper, which I also did not want to do because 5x7's a really good size for a painting, and I didn't want it to be this weird, awkward size. Now, if I ever wanted to frame it, I would never find a frame for that. Or 3, option number 3, which is what I ended up going with, was adding something to fill the composition. And this made me think about how when we make mistakes or there's stumbling blocks, like I've painted terracotta dishes before, and sometimes you get them and there's a big chip in the side. And I'm thinking, okay, I could throw this away, or I could try and cover it up. And that's how I started using clay and embellishments on my terracotta trays. I'll try and put a picture or something up so you can see what I'm talking about, because I know that's a total tangent from watercolors. But it's that same thing. It's that same thing where it's like, okay, there's something imperfect about this. How can I get creative to solve this problem? Instead of starting over, instead of being frustrated, there's got to be a creative solution. And the best part about it is is that if you're deciding between trying something different that you don't know if it'll cover up your mistake and throwing away and starting over, is that even if you do the creative option and you don't like the way it works, at least you tried and you didn't just give up an opportunity. You would have ended up at the same place anyhow. You either would have ended up throwing it away or trying, saying, no, I don't love it, and maybe using that piece of paper as a scrap, as a color swatch, something like that. But in this case, I loved the way the daffodil looked in the sketch, so I decided to keep it. And now I'm so happy that it's there because it brings in a new pop of color. It gives a little story. It looks like the daffodil is being smelled by the pig. I think it looks quite charming, actually. And so it's funny how those mistakes end up becoming some of the best parts of our artwork, and they give our brain just enough of that stretch to do something different, to think outside the box. And I think it really helps us to grow our skills at the end of the day. What you see me doing here is just going in and filling in any of those little gaps that I didn't get the first time around or the second time around. And I'm just touching up little bits. But that's pretty much it. You'll see that I have a final shot at the end giving you a close-up of our pig painting here. Once again, I'd love to know not only what you think of the painting, but tell me if you see any nostalgic references. Do you see Beast and Hamilton in this painting? I'd love to know. Drop it down in the comments, and until then, I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.